Okay, good morning. Good morning. We'll get started. We'll start with the blessing, and then we'll jump in and see what we have to wrap up from last time, or whatever may be unaddressed, and then we'll continue with our story. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, who enjoined us to engage with words of meaning and significance, with Torah. Okay, thoughts about last time? Yes?
I would just like to praise you both for an excellent job last week. I never understood totally all the symbolism in Jacob's ladder story, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Did everyone hear that? We got a nice compliment.
Would you like to say more, Jez?
About the layers of symbolism, or the depth, the amount of symbolism that
Incredible.
could be drawn from such a story of the ladder.
Done, I thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we ready to move on past the Jacob's ladder story? Any last lingering things? The next section is one way to think about it, is a very long, relative to other things we've read, a long narrative about Jacob leaving where he was and going to the east. And Susie was asking me, when we say to the land of the people of the east, what is that, China? Where's he going? Haran. Where is that? In current day Turkey. So he's headed to the old country where our family comes from, where we still have relatives. And so this is hundreds of miles away. So again, if you're on foot or riding a camel, that's a long journey. Now, there are two potential reasons why he's headed east, back to his people. What are those two reasons that Jacob set out on this journey? I want to get in touch with my family roots. No. I'm trying to run away from my brother Esau because I stole his inheritance, his promise, and he's the big, tough, manly man, outdoorsman, and is furious I stole his birthright, and I'm the mama's boy who lives in tents, so I might be more clever, but he will kill me or beat me up. Is that fair? So that's at least one reason. I would call that the practical, familial, family reason. What would be another reason, a theological one, that he is headed to the east? He's got to get the right wife. And so you need to marry someone in the family. Not too close, a little closer than we might like. Like any family is too close, but in their mind, that's purity. That's the right type of people. They believe the right things, they're connected, they know us, and so on and so forth. So you need to go find a wife there. Why is that so important? Other than parents everywhere want their kids to marry well, why in the overall arc of the story does that matter, that he's got to go there, back east, amongst the right people to find a wife? The family line. Because the promise from God, the inheritance that began with Abraham and has passed through Isaac and is now with Jacob, how is that going to continue unless there is a proper heir to that promise, an heir? So every time, let me interject, we're reading in Paul and other places, we are heirs. Think of this story, the larger Genesis story. We are heirs of that inheritance going all the way back there. That's really what they mean. So Jacob needs to find a wife to have daughters, right? Yeah, not so much. I mean, that'd be nice. But a son to pass on this line. Because at least in the context of the story, in that society at the time, the identity, the inheritance, was passed through the male. And so he's got to find a wife, appropriate wife, so that promise from God can be passed on. Is this all a human action, at least according to the story? Is this my decision? All my decisions affect all the outcome? Or is it more, God seems to work with what God has? Probably more the latter. We participate in it, but somehow, let me ask it this way. Is Jacob somebody you'd want your daughter to date or marry? I would say, heck no. What's Jacob's like? What's his character so far that we've read? Sneaky, deceitful. What else did I hear? A con artist. What did you say, Dave? Devious. Oh, you mean he's our spiritual forebear, which is the case. He fought with his brother, grabbing at his heel in the womb. And then what else did he do? He stole his brother's birthright. You remember any other stories? He had this great vision, though, of God, of angels ascending and descending on this ladder. So somehow, despite him being a generally unpleasant, conniving person, he's still blessed. Aren't you supposed to be good to get God's blessing? Isn't that how it works? I mean, doesn't everybody know that? What did I do to deserve this? Someone just asked me that yesterday. I've had no behavior bad, in my estimation, to have deserved this terrible thing that happened to me. What have I done to deserve this? You could ask the question of Jacob. What has he done to deserve what he got? He put a rock up and dumped some oil on there? What's his other good work that you can tell? How has he been faithful? How has he created justice in the world? How has he been righteous? Can you think of anything? What am I missing, Rabbi?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. He's a normal, average guy, not particularly holy or good, as we might think of that. Is he a person of moral integrity? Not really. We'll see a bit more in the next story. Does Jacob have a good relationship with his father? No. Does he have a good relationship with his brother? No. His mom? Mom was, well, yeah. His mom, yeah. His future wife? Not so much. Or let me say, wives, plural. Sandra. Then why should his line be continued? That's a question, isn't it? Was Abraham much better? A little bit. What about Isaac? Except for the sacrificing his son part. Was he better?
So, no. Rather undistinguished. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They don't suggest themselves as most likely to succeed or the one most likely to be selected by God, which then requires us, in reading the story as sort of the omniscient reader, knowing how the story plays out, to determine one of a couple things. Either, isn't it amazing that God works with imperfect people or tools, or things happen in places where you wouldn't expect it, or, right, the obvious choice isn't the one that God goes with, and God's ways are inscrutable thereby, or why not you, or right, sort of reading in reverse, trying to figure out how it is such that an Abraham and Isaac, or in this case, a Jacob, gets selected to be the one who carries forth the line, or be the one who fulfills God's promise, right? Or perhaps this story, later, I think I mentioned once earlier, but let me just throw it out. The stories are troubling in that we have a repeated case of the second son supplanting his older brother. This happens back from Cain and Abel. It happens again with Isaac and Ishmael. It happens again with Jacob and Esau. We're going to see it a number of times. And it gets used later by some early church fathers who suggest that similarly, Judaism was the firstborn, as it were, and its sibling religion, Christianity, coming second, comes to supplant it. Interesting. Right? I mean, theologically, it's consistent, particularly if you can point to a Jacob who's a swindler, a conniver, he's devious, he's right. He got the sort of ill-gotten gain, his birthright, or his being able to continue it. So the story, we don't want to oversimplify it or domesticate it. Was the word that Amy Jo Levine used when we were looking at the parables of Jesus. But it should leave us with more questions than answers and not so easily resolved. But yes, it's true. Now, Abraham didn't do anything that particularly distinguished him. Moses, particularly either. Isaac and Jacob after the fact. It's a curious choice. It's the one we wouldn't expect.
So ask your question again.
And why was his line continued, and did it get any better?
Why was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's line continued, and did it get any better? Did it get any better? Not really. You know, every family has the smart one, the athletic one, the really talented one, and then you got the one who just never makes anything of his life. This is an extended family. One could say theologically, like big picture, God uses the clay at hand to craft a beautiful work. That's part of the theological idea that it's all up to God. When we talk about the next part of the story, there's a lot about barrenness, the woman not being able to bear. All of this life is God's doing. All of the continued promise is God working even with the most conniving, despicable, corrupt even people. So did they do anything to deserve the promise? No, I don't think they did at all. Didn't God have a better choice? That's a great question. Probably. I would say this. Couldn't God have chosen somebody more suited than Jesus? Why did he pick? I mean, it's the same type of question. Why not pick thank God he picked a man rather than a woman, obviously. But, well, I'm joking. Why did he choose somebody poor? If somebody rich, royalty, the message would have got out more easily. It would have been more heard, more respected. Why not choose somebody, if you're going to go Jewish, why not at least the right Jewish family? Somebody from the Sanhedrin or, the respectable.
Jesus was moral. He was without sin.
He was without sin.
Jacob had lots of sins going on.
He did, but didn't God use what the person was? By that I mean, Jesus was moral, but that was his choice all the time. Jacob and all the rest of them, and pick anybody else in the Bible, Peter, Paul, every disciple, maybe you'd leave out Mary, were any of them really good people? What was Paul most known for while he was Saul? Persecuting Christians. He was a rotten person. And he was really good at it. Paul was the guy that's like on the school board and goes to every meeting and knows what everybody's thinking and saying it all the time and goes after you for it. And he persecuted Christians. Peter, what were Peter's issues? He denied Jesus 3 times in front of people, yet he became the head of the church, what we'd call the Pope now, or the first bishop of that. And these are the people that God uses. Jesus is the one without sin, you're absolutely right, but everybody else seems to be an imperfect individual. Marianne?
But by saying God picks these people and they don't seem that good, because, for me, there's free will in that scenario. Like, when God picks Peter, Peter has a choice. Deny Christ, or is it to own up to his role as a follower? It's too easy to say God picks them, and maybe
Marianne's stating that there is such an idea as free will, which I happen to agree with. And Peter, for example, had a choice to deny Jesus or not deny Jesus. And there would be consequences for both. I think everybody is called, the expression is, few are...
Everyone's called, few are chosen.
Everyone's called, few are chosen. Everyone is called, but not everybody chooses with his or her free will to follow that call. Or what's that?
To accept the call.
To accept the call. I think that God uses imperfect people in Israel, and it's a great example to us, because if even those despicable people can be loved by God, well, that means I can too. In the Christian tradition, is anyone good? What does Paul say? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us are removed from, yes, we're still loved by God, but we are imperfect people. That's a root base idea for all of that. I won't go into all the theology, but nobody's good to inherit the promises. That's part of the Christian idea. We'll talk about original sin and all those other things of the why, but nobody's worthy. Jesus makes us worthy is the idea. We have added, I don't know this with Judaism, we have added within Christianity, through the message of Jesus, that we are called to try to live like Jesus, to love, to do good, to avoid bad, to create a more just society, and all the way, like in personal moral life, as well as corporate life and then societal life, that we are called to act it out that way. What is that? Now I know the answer. What is that within Judaism?
That you should be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. I mean, it's aspirational.
Or here's a really crazy, totally Christian idea that Jesus says, what are the great commandments? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Where did he get that from?
Torah, Judaism.
The Torah. He got it from Judaism, his own tradition. So we're borrowing and adapting slightly an idea that there is this moral dimension. But of course, Judaism has that as well. That was not as prevalent, is that fair to say?
What was not as
The
prevalent?
moral dimension in the early...
Right. I think that's right. There was a question here, there.
Yes, Sherry had one.
Okay.
Tom?
Maybe we could say that God chooses us or sees us as He made us. That is, us, we are not so much born in original sin as we are born as the beautiful and the people that God makes. We later become sinful.
So the idea of original sin is not we're born into it, but we choose, our actions lead to that. You could say we're like Adam and Eve in original sin in that way. If we make the same choices they did, it's probably an easier way for us to think about original sin. I think that's quite reasonable.
Yeah, so
Let me ask you this. Anybody in here a parent, and your kid, particularly as a teenager, did something unbelievably stupid, where you either had to go to the principal's office or the police or wait till your other parent gets home? Think of that. Did you still love them? Yeah. But is what they did really boneheaded, and that's not how I raised you to be? How do you think God feels about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, everybody in this room? Same, very similar, if not the same. Steve?
Well, then you get down to there are degrees of being worthy. It's binary. Jacob, we look at him and say, oh, he did some really bad things. But he is no more or no less worthy than anybody else. So the choice isn't, he could have chosen someone better. At least the way I see it, the choice is he had to choose someone who was unworthy, and you are or you aren't, and we all are not.
That's an excellent point. So, is anybody, now don't raise your hand because we do have a video camera rolling. Is anybody consider themselves more morally upright than Jacob? I said, don't raise your hand because everybody's going to see that. I would suggest the moment, I'm better than those losers, than those sinners, you're right in with them. If you think you're better than Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, all the rest. He uses what we've got, and he's no better, no worse than anybody else. And I really, quite honestly, love that in this story, all these people are not saints. I mean, they're not boring, vanilla, oh, they're so good all the time. We should all try to be more like Jacob. I wouldn't tell my kid to be more like Jacob at all. But we can aspire to that. Allison?
What about the idea that God, that we sin so that we would need God more? Do you think that might be part
The idea that we sin so we need God more. I don't think that's a very good idea. There is a joke. This was I don't tell seminary jokes very often, but the phrase was sin boldly so grace may abound. Like, no, don't do that. It's not helpful. I need a little more gods, so I'm going to do a little more sinning to invite him in. That's not how it works.
That's funny.
also the thing that there's no such thing as original sin because every sin has been already done. So
There's no such thing as original sin because every sin has already been done, and several multiple times, as it turns out. Nancy?
Maybe one of the points is the promise is bigger than the flawed people that are carrying
Oh, brilliant. The promise is bigger than the flawed people that have to carry that promise.
That's good.
It's God's promise that's operative, and it is trying to lift the people up. Be worthy of the promise, even though they're not worthy.
I have a couple of thoughts, but on this one, I think it's out of context in that I don't think it's what he intended, but in Walden, Thoreau writes, he's talking about having differences of opinions that seem to be contradictory. He says, do I contradict myself? Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. If we changed it, we said, do I sin? Repeatedly, but I'm much more than that. Yes? I'm thinking of that in this conversation, I have a couple of thoughts here that don't... They don't cohere, but they're various thoughts I've had. One is that we tend to focus, can we give a sermon about this? I don't remember whether it was yours or mine, that we focus on what we see. And God sees us in a different way. So we tend to focus on the exterior. We judge each other by what we look like, or what we observe, or what we project and imagine, right? Or we make a list of what's on our permanent record at school, or what's on our rap sheet, or what's on our CV, or our financial statement, or right? We sort of measure ourselves in those ways, and then rank ourselves relative to others in that frame. But God sees us in terms of what our potential is, or what our capabilities are, or what we were created to be. There's a wonderful rabbinic legend that perhaps is my favorite. It's about a rabbi named Rabbi Zusia. And Zusia, according to this story, is on his deathbed, and he's surrounded by his students, his disciples, as it were, and he begins to shake and tremble with fear. And each student in turn tries to mollify and pacify Reb Zusia by reassuring him, Reb Zusia, you have nothing to fear. As you prepare to meet God, you've been as pious as Moses. And says another one, you have nothing to fear, you've been as righteous as Abraham. And another says, you've been as generous to the poor as is this person. Each person names another character against whom Zusia has held up well. And Zusia's response is that he's not worried that when he meets God, God will ask him why he wasn't as pious as Moses, or as scholarly as this fellow, or as generous to the poor as this. He'll ask me, Zusia, why weren't you Zusia? Why weren't you all I created you to be? And if we take that frame, that there's an expectation that God has of us, and we have the potential to fulfill that, to be the very best version of ourselves, and it's in that God identifies us or chooses us, or we're all called. Few choose to heed the call, or few are chosen to step up in that moment. Well, then we have a different way of understanding why Jacob, why not Jacob? Jacob has the potential. The other thought I had connected to this, there's a teaching in Judaism that says, the one who is a sinner and repents is holier than the one who has never sinned. That actually to have recognized your faults, or to have changed your ways, or to have not given to temptation this next time, because you know what happened last time, is a harder thing to do and is more meritorious than is the person who's never tempted. or has never strayed, or has never erred. That may make those of us who have fallen short in whatever dimension feel good, but there's that notion also, that we tend to see Jacob or Isaac or Abraham or the patriarchs or the disciples, whoever it may be, and we focus in on what ought disqualify them. Whereas we would hope not to be disqualified from any future reward or gain or accomplishment or recognition. Yes?
And also, God knows our entire inner life. All of our real motivations, when we do something right, maybe our motivations actually weren't that good. When we do something wrong, we may have struggled not to. He knows that, and we don't know that about other people. God does know that.
Did everyone hear that?
Just say that.
And it's true of the characters in the story, actually, because we just get the external stuff, but
Excellent.
we don't actually know.
The comment is, it's really very beautiful, is that God knows our entire inner life. That which we've struggled to overcome, or that which we gave into, or that which was difficult for us, or that which we worked really hard at, but we still fell short. Whereas you and I, we only see the outside, or the result, and have no idea of the difficulty or the effort that went into. We sort of learn this when we learn about how hard it is to actually accomplish something such that it looks easy, right? We don't appreciate the amount of time and practice that goes into something so that it becomes easy. By the same token, we may see someone who continually seems to make the same mistake, having no idea of the effort they're actually putting in or the obstacles they're having to overcome. Yes? Does that capture? Great. The other I was going to say is that many have read the Torah as a sort of a sweeping story about self-actualization or getting better, learning from mistakes, that humanity itself is working on improving ourselves. Now, whether or not we buy that, whether or not we look at the world now and say we're any better than we were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, is an interesting enough conversation. But the idea is that in the trajectory of our own lives, we hope to get better at things, or we hope to not be the same person that we were when we were younger and knew less, or were less empathic. I tell people all the time that if as you're aging, you're not gaining greater empathy for everyone else's struggles, then you're not doing it right. You're just not doing it right. Time should give you that greater appreciation for the fact that life isn't so simple, where things aren't always the way they seem, or we wouldn't want to be judged, although we often are. We wouldn't want to be judged on our worst day for the way we fell short, but rather for the way in which we're continuing to evolve and mature and improve throughout a lifetime. Yes?
But what's the ultimate standard for better?
What's the ultimate standard?
Yeah, what is the best of better?
Well, what would you like to be judged by? What would you like to be judged by?
How would you like to be judged? By what things in your life would you prefer to be judged?
None.
Great answer.
Truer words haven't been spoken, right? Right?
The other
you
people,
you set the curve,
judged.
right? That you set the curve,
That's pretty good.
right?
We all agree, right? None of us want to be judged. But who has the right to judge us?
God, that's the
We give
story.
God the right to judge us?
We don't need to give God the right to judge us. In the story, at least, speaking from that, God created us from nothing and has the right, therefore, to love us, nurture us, and a part of that is to, or destroy us. How often have you seen that in the story so far? Once?
What if God doesn't exist?
Well, that's a different set of questions then.
Robert Burns say virtue untested is not virtue at all.
Virtue untested is not virtue at all, from Robert Burns. So I would say, all this makes me think of a group of people who really get this at a deep level is 12-step programs, AA, and there's a Sam Shoemaker Calvary connection. For somebody who's just recognizes that I have an issue with alcohol, this is too powerful for me to do on my own. I need God or a higher power, and to look at that drink sitting in the bar and really, really focus on that as the most important thing in the world at that moment and not pick it up to drink it is a massive moral victory. And you could say at that moment that's the most righteous person in the world. For me, I don't really care for alcohol. That would not be a thing at all. I would have other issues to deal with. But to start thinking of it as Aaron said, that it's an improvement thing and that we'd like not to be judged. If we are going to be judged by the one who made us. And I would say, does anybody here judge themselves? I would say, and you don't have, that's an internal monologue, which in some ways is like a dialogue going on of all the time. A devastating fact, this is not biblical, but it's current society, that current media, particularly social media, have, is we have exposure to what you're supposed to look like or feel like or sound like or whatever all the time. We're bombarded by that. And that was never really the case before. When I grew up, it was you can keep up with the Joneses because you see your neighbor's got a new car. Oh my God, now you see what everybody's eating and watching and how beautiful and fashionable they are constantly. And that's really, really difficult to live with. But if you judge yourself, what's the standard you hold yourself accountable to? Let me ask you that. Do the best you can. Perfection. Oh, geez, Jim. Jim holds himself to perfection versus do the best you can. There's a pretty big gap, I think, between there. Jeffrey.
I'm always disappointed.
And he's always disappointed. He doesn't meet up. Jeffrey, the former monk, what do you say?
I would say that progress would be an okay standard.
Progress would be an okay standard. I would suggest, if you're thinking about, because it's something we all do, and we don't talk about that very much, that I'm judging myself, I'm disappointed in myself, I'm proud of myself, whatever it may be. That you only judge yourself compared to yourself, not other people. Like, that person's impossibly richer or better looking or smarter or whatever, or more accomplished. I judge myself only against myself. And I'm judging myself today compared to what I was yesterday.
That's right.
Or today, what I'm trying to be tomorrow. And that I'm trying to improve, whatever that means for you. I would say within the Christian, the Jewish context, how do I, within my cultural realm, my life, love and serve God and my neighbors? How do I get more educated? How do I get better fit physically, mentally healthy? So you're always judging yourself only against yourself. I guarantee you will have a better spiritual and mental life for that. Are we ready to go into the next story with 20 minutes left? No, it's 3 chapters. But go ahead.
Well, I just want to teach one thing. I think we may have said this when we were looking at the story of Noah, but it bears repeating. Just to share with you that these questions are unresolved from the beginning and are perhaps best not rushing to resolution. So you may remember that at the very beginning of the story of Noah and the ark, Noah is described as righteous in his generation. And that's the way he's described. He's righteous in his generation. And we know that his generation was the generation that was completely obliterated, drowned in the flood. And so the question is that faint praise? He's just better than everybody else, but everyone else was not worthy of surviving. He just eked out on a curve. He was somewhat better. Someone has to be saved, right, in order to continue propagating the human species, and that's Noah. Or was Noah, even in the face of everyone being terrible or being devious, duplicitous, conniving, all these terrible qualities, even in such a place, he was able to focus on being righteous, whether that righteous means being perfect or whether it means getting better every day or making some degree of progress. Is an open conversation. It's not resolved. But even the lone figure who survives the flood, he and his family, he's identified as being righteous in his generation relative to the other folks around him. The other thought I have, and this also comes from 12 Steps, is the admonition not to judge your insides. Jonathan asked, who judges themselves? And everyone sort of said, gosh, that's one of the problems I have. I'm constantly critiquing myself, or I'm measuring myself against others, or whatever it is. I have this inner dialogue where I'm telling myself X, Y, or Z vis-a-vis who I am in this drama. One of those admonitions that comes out of the 12-step program, it's not one of the 12 steps, but suggests that you not judge your insides, by others' outsides. That is to say, you not take the measure of someone what they look like. They look like they have it all together. They look like they've got no problems whatsoever. That individual, that marriage, that family, that whatever it might be, not to judge your insides by somebody else's outsides, right? Which gets back to God sees us in our entirety, right? Okay, we can go on.
So next 3 chapters, 29, 30, and 31, are one long story, basically. It could function as a separate unit. And these are the context we started 40 minutes ago with. Jacob's getting out of town because his brother wants to kill him, so he's going to go far away back towards modern-day Turkey. And he's also fulfilling part of the promise to find a wife so this inheritance from God can continue. He meets, who does he go meet? Anybody read that far ahead yet? Laban. Laban is who? Laban. His uncle, his wife's brother?
His mother's brother.
Sorry, mother's brother. Mother's brother back in the old country. And in the story, he falls in love with a girl. It's a nice romance. But he marries the wrong one, and then he got to marry another one, and then they can't have kids, and so he has basically girlfriends upon girlfriends and wives and lots of kids, and doesn't sound morally upright at all. And then remember, what did Jacob do to get the inheritance from Esau, his older brother? An honest negotiation. He tricked his father, so he deceived him to get it. And guess who gets his comeuppance, or karma's a you-know-what in this story? This is part of that going in there. So the guy who's the trickster gets tricked. And not a little one. It's a 20-year trick, or at least 7 more years type of trick. And then there's some fighting and drama goes on, then he goes back to the Canaan, to modern-day Israel. So he goes away. It's a 20-year trip that this 3 chapters takes. Goes away, gets married, gets rich, by the way, like really, really rich, and then goes back to modern-day Israel to carry on that promise. So that's the 3-chapter story that we will go through. Shall I read a little bit, and then we'll start into it? This is not as dense as the Jacob's ladder story or Jacob and Esau arguing with one another. But think of all these 3 things as a unit. It's a good movie we watch, and then it goes back to another really intense Jacob story. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone in the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers," friends, "where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." Where's that? Haran? Turkey. That's the old country. He said, "Hey, I'm from there. Do you know Laban, son of Nahor?" They said, "We do." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" "Yes," they replied. "And here is his daughter Rachel coming in with the sheep." Then you get the sexy music come on the screen and move to this beautiful young girl emerging right by the well. Look, her hair is flowing in the wind and all of that. And there is the daughter Rachel coming with the sheep. He said, "Look, it is still broad daylight. It's not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." What is he doing? Is he trying to get rid of the guys so he can talk to the girl? Kind of feels that way. Hey, don't you have somewhere to be now, guys? Okay. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban, Jacob went up and rolled away the well's mouth, the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock. We just point out, Hey, here's this hot girl. Watch me move this giant rock. Ah! Bam! Look at that. I got a license for these things. You know, he's like got his chest out, looking the part. And she's like, oh, wow, he's so impressive. Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, watered the flock. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. This was not a romantic kiss, but a kiss of greeting. Am I right on that? Probably.
We'd like it to be that.
We'd like it to be that. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father, hey, we have companies here. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to the house. So remember, when we get to the end of the story, 3 chapters later, this is how Uncle Laban greets his nephew by an embrace and a kiss. It ends with a kiss of departure. And Laban said to him, surely you are bone in my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? What is that? Neighbor or guest and fish stink after 3 days. What's that expression? So he's there for a month. Hey, you're still here. What's going on? But he ends up working for him. So because you're my kinsman, because we're family, I'm going to cut you a deal. But there's somehow a negotiation going on. Is that right? Because you're my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Rachel's the beautiful one whom he met and impressed. Leah's eyes were lovely. Leah has a good personality. But Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years to be married to your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Okay, 7 years you'll work for me and run my flocks, is what he ended up doing. I agree to your terms, because I'd rather, marry her off to you than somebody else. If I got to marry her off, why not to family? It is better I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love he had for her. That's a beautiful line. It passed so quickly because his love was so overwhelming. Then it gets a little PG-13, just FYI, so don't be triggered, any of that. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her. That means exactly what you think it means. For my time is completed. I did the 7 years, now give me the woman right now. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. Switcheroo. And he went into her. How you wouldn't know living with the same people? Maybe it was dark. He couldn't see her beautiful eyes and all that. And he went into her. Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. When morning came, it was Leah. Oh my God. And Jacob said to Laban, what have you done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Imagine the great deceiver who stole the birthright is now deceived after he worked 7 years. 7 years you waited to be with her. Psych. No, you're with Leah. Laban said, why have you deceived me? This is not done in our country, giving the younger before the firstborn. This is primogeniture again. The older daughter, the older son, goes first. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. What? I already did 7. You got to do 7 more, and then I will marry off the one you really love to you. So you'll have 2 wives. Leah the older with the beautiful eyes, and Rachel the graceful and beautiful, the younger that you love. So you got to do 14 years working for me, and then I will let you marry both of them. Jacob did so, completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife, gave a maid. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. It just plain out says it right there. He loved her more than Leah. So you've got this unbelievably complicated family dynamic built in yet again with this promise. He served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved by Jacob, he opened her womb. So she had a baby, or was pregnant anyway. Rachel was barren. So he doesn't love me, but I got the baby, you're stuck. That would be unbelievably complicated. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked on my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. What does Reuben mean?
It's corned beef and sauerkraut.
Corned beef and sauerkraut. But biblically, that was a total softball setup. Biblically, what does Reuben mean? Lord's seen me.
Yes.
So most of these names are a direct response to the situation. He hears my cry. He sees me, laughter, and so on. So the names all mean something. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard, the heard is the name, he has given me this son also, and she named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be joined to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah, which means praise the Lord. Then she ceased bearing. So imagine, my husband doesn't love me, but I've given him 4 sons, and what have you done? Beautiful, graceful one. Any other comments on that? It's not, this doesn't seem like it should be in the Bible to me, quite honestly. Charles?
Why is she barren?
That's a brilliant question. That will come up in the next chapter. Why is it her fault? Rachel's fault that she can't conceive and not his fault. I would say after 4 examples with the sister, it's probably not his fault, but it's just assumed. Rachel will blame him for this. And then they pull up some, you'll hear in the next chapter, they find an aphrodisiac, mandrake plants, and try to use that. And there's all this weird magic, superstitious divination that appears in the story too. It's a very strange mixture of thoughts together there. But why is it her fault rather than his fault? Presumably because she's a woman.
Right. I was going to say that from a biblical scholarly point of view, from an academic point of view, I would suggest it has to do with ignorance in the same way as there were kings who killed their wives for not giving them a male heir, failing to appreciate that it's the man who provides the Y chromosome that makes for boys, right? So that's just ignorance, and I'm sure there's a layer of misogyny in this too, by the original authors, and I think it's a safe bet.
Who else had their hand up? Elise?
This is a small detail, but I was wondering why it mentions that Laban gave his daughters these maids, and it even gives them names. This is very important.
Good question. Why did Laban, the uncle, give a maid to each of his daughters and names them?
Because they show up later in the story.
They show up later in the story. They're a supporting cast type of character. I would not want to be a maid in that family, she said. That's, yes. Because a lot of the maids get turned into concubines, it turns out. I mean, that's where Ishmael came from, remember.
Right.
Anything else? Russ? This may be X-rated is a wonderful way to start any question in church. what is the custom of complete the week with his new wife, Leah?
I know that in traditional Jewish observance or practice, the first week after the wedding is you're sort of feted, F-E-T-E-D, by different parties, different families, friends. You're going house to house and being celebrated in that way. They're providing what's called the 7 wedding blessings, and you're sort of sharing that time with the wider community. It could be that. I don't know. I've never actually addressed that particular question. I'm thinking, Jonathan put us in the mind of 3 days was considered a length of time sufficient to be certain that someone had actually died, right? As opposed to going somnolent and then awaking. That perhaps a week, we know something about the marriage. It'll surely have been consummated. It'll, I don't know exactly. But it seems to be a reference to some recognized, ritualized length of time following the ceremony.
I already paid for all the parties. We're going to have them. Everybody in the community will celebrate. Any last questions?
I have one.
Son.
Even complicated even more. Was Rachel not smart enough to say to Jacob, all right, if you think it's my fault that I'm barren, you go into my maid and let's see if you get her pregnant.
Well, he's already gotten her
Why
sister.
didn't she say,
He's already gotten the sister pregnant, right? Leah's already become
oh,
pregnant.
Right. Sorry.
I thought you were going to say something different. Are you not surprised that Jacob didn't understand the tradition wherein the older daughters married off first? Surely Jacob should have known something. It's one thing for Laban to swap a daughter for the other daughter and, under the cloak of night to marry off one before the other, but surely Jacob should have picked up on it at some point in those 7 years that the younger daughter doesn't get married until the older daughter has been married, right? So we have another insight perhaps into Jacob. Do that with that what you will, right? Sort of a little bit of a not only might we not think it's something that should be in the Bible because this story is so bizarre or so unusual or quirky or full of human foibles. But it also reads in some ways, I've always thought it like particularly the Jacob and Esau and Isaac switcheroo there from the last couple of weeks, like a Jerry Lewis movie, right? Where something happens here, someone exits stage left, the next person walks in, something else completely happens, and it just builds on all this misunderstanding. So there's a lot here that sort of goes unspoken, or that you only realize too late in the story.
Okay. We'll pick up there with this story next week. Thank you all very much.